Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention for one quick minute? We are just waiting on a few people at the line at the front desk, but if you look to your left and look to your right, and if there's a space between you and the person sitting next to you, make a quick friend and slide in a little bit so we can bring people to the edges of the theater.
afternoon. Welcome. This is a great turnout, but I would expect nothing less for Griff Durham. My name is Caitlin Bell. I am the Jean Jones Director of Public Programs here at the Nevada Museum of Art, and I'm so glad you could join us for today's Art Bite tracing Maynard Dixon's 1901 horseback journey. A few housekeeping items before we get started. If you could silence your cell phone for today's presentation. Following the presentation, there will be time for a few questions. I and Caleb will be on either side of the seats today running microphones for our recording so that we can capture your questions and Griff's answers. Sagebrush and Solitude Maynard Dixon in Nevada is on view on the third floor until July 28th, 2024. Thank you to our many generous sponsors of this exhibition and to you, our members and visitors who make programs like this a possibility. Griff Durham is a historian who has been interested in cowboy, horse gear, and Great Basin ranching traditions for over 50 years and has guest curated and consulted on exhibitions at the Western Folklife Center in Elko, Nevada. He has been a dear friend of the museum for many years, and we're so happy to welcome him today. Welcome, Griff.
I first became aware of this cowboy vision quest that the two artists made in 1901 in 2013 when the original of one of the drawings he did for Harper's Weekly was sold at the Coeur d'Alene auction. This one. And it mentions that the two took a trip horseback from Oakland to Pocatello, Idaho, and the P Ranch, and visiting the P Ranch on the trip. And then several years later, visiting the museum or the library in Visalia, I got this picture of a Visalia stock saddle company catalog. This is their last catalog before the earthquake came out in 1904. And I suspected, having seen this, that might be a Dixon. At the time, my wife, who was the research docent here, was preparing for the particularly Dixon exhibit. And she helped me with it, and we went a little further. I don't know how much I knew at that point. And then Ann Wolf sent me this picture and wanted me to verify that it was authentic Great Basin buckaroo gear. And I told her, yes, it was, from the silver-mounted split-ear head stall to the silver-mounted spade bit, to the rein chains, to the rawhide braided reins and romal, to the rawhide riata, to the woolly chaps, to the round-skirted single cinch saddle, and the drop shank spurs. And then I thought nothing more of it until I ran into Ann at the Coeur d'Alene auction a couple of years ago. And she mentioned, of course, that we were having this show, and I told her that I was looking at some Dixon drawings that were in a gallery in Tucson, and she told me that they were going to be in the exhibit, and that if I was serious about purchasing them, I should do it right away. That way they could go into the catalog and be on the wall under our names. So I splurged, and there are 3 of the drawings from this trip are there. One of the things that I learned in the research that I've done preparing for this was that the relationship and the connections between Dixon and Borein were closer than I thought. and I thought I'd go through some of them. They were both native sons of California, both, and their birth and death dates were within a couple of years of each other. They apparently first met at the San Francisco Art Institute, where both of them had very abbreviated stays. Borein said that he only went 2 weeks out of the month that his mother had paid for, and Dixon said he lasted 3 months. Neither of them could accommodate to formal art education. Most studies assume that they were there together. I somehow think it's unlikely, the coincidence, but they obviously met through the group of artists there. They were also both discovered by Charles Loomis and had their work published in his magazine, Land of Sunshine, which extolled the virtues of Southern California and explored its history and art and literature. And then, of course, the 1901 journey, where they traveled nearly 1,000 miles through some pretty rigorous horseback traveled, and through some pretty rigorous country, camping out. So it either solidified the friendship or ended it. Apparently, it solidified it. They both went to New York after the earthquake in San Francisco, when work for illustrators was drastically reduced. Borein stayed longer in New York. He was there nearly 20 years, and his studio became sort of the home away from home for Westerners. Charlie Russell, Will James, Will Rogers would frequent his studio when they had occasion to be in New York. They both returned from New York to the Bay Area. They both had artwork on the covers of Visalia catalogs, Dixon in 1904 and Borein in 1940 and 47. And last but not least, they both have had their artwork exhibited at the Nevada Museum of Art. The Borein exhibit was in the winter of 1999, 2000, and this is the third Dixon show since then. This is Charles Loomis. You see it's done by Dixon. He was a strange man. He was hired as a city editor for the Los Angeles Times in 1885, and he walked from Cincinnati to Los Angeles, sending dispatches on his way. He got to Los Angeles in the midst of a population boom, where the old pastoral scene was rapidly disappearing. The old land grant ranchos were being broken up into smaller farms and urban centers, and he was a devotee of of Southern California's Hispanic and indigenous heritage, which he saw rapidly disappearing. As I've mentioned, he was the editor of Land of Sunshine, which was a magazine about Southern California and extolling its virtues to tourists. He was also the founder of the Landmarks Club in 1894, the specific purpose of which was to save the missions, which were rapidly declining. There was a lot of resistance. That people said that they belonged to the Catholic Church and they should take care of them, but the fact that most of the missions have been restored is due to the efforts of Loomis and the Landmarks Club. Probably the most important thing was that he became a mentor, a patron of a lot of artists and writers, including Borein and Dixon, who were both married at Lummis's El Alisal home on the Arroyo Seco in the LA area. And Joe Mora, also a disciple of his. His mantra was, which is important to us, that because California was rapidly filling up and urbanizing, that one had to go east to see the real West. In general, what he meant was you had to go to the Southwest and, you know, spend time with the Pueblo Indians or the Navajo, and the rite of passage was to be given a Kachina doll or be allowed to witness the snake dance to show that you had spent your time there. But for our purposes, I believe the going east to see the West also dictated the trip that we're about to explore. California was, the Great Basin ranching industry was established almost exclusively by California ranching enterprises going over the Sierra and taking advantage of available grazing land in the Great Basin. A remarkable number of the legendary ranches in the Great Basin were established between 1869 and 1873. The two forces, there was the push me, pull you. The balance of power between farmers and ranchers had changed in favor of the farmers by the late 60s. Prior to that, to protect the state laws stipulated that a farmer had to build a fence, and it was and there were rigorous standards for the fence, and it made farming almost cost prohibitive in order to prevent livestock from damaging their crops. With the change in politics, political power, the farmers began countywide establishing no fence laws, where the responsibility became that of the cattlemen. So there was this incentive to leave the great California and drive over the Sierras, and also there was the establishment of a transportation link. The railroad was completed in 1869, and so this vast area of grazing land became attractive to California ranchers. In 1869, the first was John Devine, who drove cattle from the Sacramento area to southeast Oregon and established the White Horse Ranch. In 1870, Jasper Harrell drove cattle from Visalia to eastern Elko County and established ranching enterprise there, and he brought with him the Shoe Sole and Wine Cup brands from Tulare County. Also, Hildreth and Dunphy, who had sold the Santa Rita Ranch to Henry Miller, his first property in the San Joaquin Valley, took their profits and established the TS Ranch east of Battle Mountain. Then the Altuve brothers, Spanish Basques, and the Garats moved to north of Tuscarora and established the Spanish Ranch in the YP. And of particular interest to us, Dr. Hugh Glenn, who had bought the San Jacinto tract in 1867, had discovered that it was much more profitable to grow wheat than cattle, but the cattle were still made money, so he sent a promising employee, Peter French, with 6 buckaroos and 1,200 head of cattle and a Chinese cook to southeast Oregon, and they established the P Ranch. This is is Pedro Altuve, the Spanish ranch, which still exists and is operating as a cattle ranch. Most of the ranches I've mentioned have. This is Governor Sparks, who bought out Jasper Harrell in Elko County, and then his partner couldn't afford to complete the purchase, and Harrell moved back, so Sparks Harrell became the largest ranching enterprise in the state with corporate headquarters in Visalia. This picture, these are P Ranch buckaroos, and this is Tabo Ortego, who was one of the 6 buckaroos who accompanied Peter French on the drive in 1872 to the Blitzen River area. This is essentially where Borein proposed that their trip should take them. He wanted to go as far as they could, ideally into Wyoming and Montana to the Canadian border. This is, you see, Dixon's Thunderbird moving, and this is the course of their journey, and this outlines their stops on the way. They left Oakland on May 6th with 6 horses, pack horses for camp gear and art supplies, indicating that they intended to do some finished work. And they made 25 miles a day up the old Highway 50 or the 50 area until they got to Echo Summit and ran into snow drifts of 6 to and heavy snows, and they arrived in Carson City exhausted, and you can see this is a letter from Dixon to Loomis saying not particularly nice things about Carson City, which is ironic because later in life when he decided to move out of San Francisco because of his emphysema and Carson City was one of the prospective places, but he decided because of the harsh winters that Tucson would be better. Dixon's comments about Reno were even less flattering. He said it was dreary and of no account. But they have apparently got information about where to start their journey. And, whoops. Their first stop that we know of from the drawings at least is Long's Ranch north of Susanville. This is a period photo of the ranch. It's now the heart of the is the Susanville Ranch Park, just north of the outskirts of and it's hard to tell where because John Long had ranches in a number of locations. The home ranch was there north of Susanville, but he also had ranches in Standish, north of Honey Lake, and on Horse Lake near Shumway. These are the first of the drawings taken from Long's Ranch. A cowboy, a buckaroo, holding a rope, keeping a horse down. And then these two, this one's upstairs in the show. This one here of the cowboy wearing probably those woolies, was in an exhibit of Dixon drawings in San Francisco, the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, and it says something about how these things got distributed. Edith Hamlin, Dixon's third and last wife, sort of managed his career, especially after his death, and strategically placed works like this, which was gifted to the Achenbach Foundation for Graphic Arts, by her. She placed his work in substantial artistic organizations, so it would be better known. From there, the two headed north towards, and they went from Susanville to Shumway. The one drawing that we found from Shumway is this bucking horse rider. And it's convenient because you sort of track them. Dixon wrote location and the month date, so we can follow their progress. And then this is interesting. We'll see later that there's a Mapes Road north of Honey Lake near Litchfield and Standish, where Long's had his ranch. This one we just discovered yesterday. Supposedly, there are a lot of Dixon drawings that relate to the trip, and there was only one that related to the trip, a picture of a dead deer we'll see later. This bizarre picture was from Horse Lake, Shumway. From there they went to Alturas, and they arrived in Alturas, and the town was in an uproar because shortly before their arrival, there had been a lynching in the small town of Lookout, 50 miles east of Alturas in Modoc County. And the town was in an uproar because there was a grand jury hearing to find out who was responsible for the lynching, for the murders. And there was a lot of animosity between the friends of the murdered men and the vigilantes, and between the vigilantes and members of their group who had turned state's evidence and confessed and were turning them in. It's also interesting that this was, you can see here the three of the lynched men. One was a teenage boy who was a full-blooded Native American from the Klamath Reservation, and two of them were stepsons of the 70-year-old man who was lynched with them, were half-breeds. So, whoa, come on. You can see that it says that 30 armed warriors arrived in Lookout from Klamath, and then many more would soon arrive. Anyway, it was so tense in the area that the state attorney general offered to send, or recommended sending in, the National Guard. Apparently that never happened. The trial was, 3 men were arraigned and held in jail, which apparently calmed down the friends of the lynched men and the Native Americans. A trial was held in December, and in early January, the 3 men were found innocent. But Dixon said that because things were so tense, he was careful about drawing, and they just did a few character studies. From there, from Alturas, they went over Cedar Pass, the Warner Mountains, into Surprise Valley, probably obviously to Cedarville, and they visited a couple of ranches, Mosquito and Coleman, and we had no idea where they were until I discovered this Washoe County map with the amazing detail. But you can see okay, I'm lost. There's Mosquito, Coleman Ranch, and Hill Camp. Oh, these are the possible routes that they took, either up through Fort Bidwell and over, or due east from Cedarville and north. These are sketches from Mosquito. There, and you'll see this is the first of many. I'm not certain, at least half of Dixon's drawings are of roping scenes. More from Mosquito. Dixon really liked these poses with the horse's head up this way, and which you will never see in Borein's drawings, because Borein really was a horseman, and this is a sign of poor horsemanship. There's Coleman Ranch, and Coleman Ranch at the time they were there was part of the Warner Valley Stock Company, which was the MC Ranch, which covered this area of Warner Valley down into northern Nevada. It was established originally by Robert McConaughey. The MC, or his brand, and you can also see that Coleman Valley was part of their range. The ranch was owned by him until the bad winter of 1889-90, when he got into financial trouble, and he incorporated and gave shares of the ranch to the people he owed money to, and it became the Warner Valley Stock Company. In 1936, it sold to Bill Kittredge, who the father of William Kittredge, the author, who was a professor at the University of Montana and has written extensively about the West. There were, however, every account mentions the J.J. Ranch. We've been unable to find any sketches that mention the J.J. I'm sorry. These are studies that he did at Coleman. Obviously, look like they're playing cards, and they are. Say Coleman, Oregon, and these two are in the show, and the ranch holdings extended across the border into Oregon, and they may have not known they were in Oregon when they were at the headquarters of the ranch. This is another one from Coleman Ranch, and it's the one that shows kind of the old California time-consuming methods of training a bridle horse. And this is a mid-stage where the horse, originally broken with a hackamore, the Californios wouldn't introduce metal into a horse's mouth because they wanted to retain its sensitivity. So when they introduced the bit, that it could be used to signal the horse, not to control it. Anyway, this is a two-rein where the rider this is a transition where you're working out of this hackamore to a place where you're just using the bit and bridle. And this one is in the exhibit. This is Hill Camp. And I wanted to notice the horizontal pole corral. Hill Camp was a cow camp, a buckaroo camp that was occupied seasonally. It wasn't occupied full time. Only when driving cattle through the area or to supervise cattle that were grazing there. This is anyway, I wanted you to notice that, because this was obviously done after he got back to San Francisco, because it's a stockade fence as opposed to a horizontal fence. But this piece is in the Eiteljorg Museum in Minneapolis. And this is one that he did in 1908, and you can see the relationship. This is one of the few that he did that I found that relate back to works done on the 1901 trip. You can see, and then this one is one that he did when he was in New York. And when he was in New York, he complained that he was required to depict the West as that he didn't recognize, the wild and woolly West. And you can see these things are relatively quiet scenes, although the horses are moving, but this one has all the violent movement. More from Hill Camp. This is a typical saddle of the time. Round-skirted saddles became popular in the high desert before they did in California, although both round and square-skirted saddles. I'm talking about this area here. Anyway, they moved from Hill Camp north. They were already technically in the Warner Valley. And this is the headquarters for the MC Ranch, were just south of Adele. It's the Adele store as they may have seen it. And this is as it is today. Then they moved to, this is the only drawing that we've found that says Warner Valley. And you can see there it's already July 1901. And as you can see, it's the study that was used to do the Harper's Weekly cover the following year. Anyway, Warner Valley was, the southern part of Warner Valley was controlled by the MC Ranch and the Warner Valley Livestock Stock Company, and the northern part was near Plush, was owned by George Washington Mapes. Mapes had moved had come to California in 1854, placermined for 4 years, got into the stock business in 1858 in Sonoma County, and then moved his operations over the hill to Plumas County, to Beckworth, and then moved to, in 1863, then moved to Reno in 1880. But he had extensive, as you can see, holdings, including in Lake County, and as you can see, there were the JJ Ranch in Warner Valley was the home ranch for his extensive operations. But you can see they talk about he was in Plumas and Lassen counties and Lake County, Oregon, and then obviously he's in Modoc County as well. He also had a ranch in Reno. As you can see here, he's arrived in Honey Lake Valley from Warner Valley, Oregon, and half of which cattle he would drive to Reno to feed for the winter. The Mapes Ranch is a university ranch on Glendale. He became very wealthy, owned a couple of blocks of commercial property in Reno, was one of the founders of the Washoe County Bank, and his family remained involved in ranching and Western themes. His son, Charles, was one of the originators of the Reno Rodeo and reputedly paid Will James, was the first person to pay Will James for his artwork, which was used on the excuse me, program and posters for the 1990 rodeo. And of course, Charlie Mapes, who's probably 2 in this picture because it was taken shortly before George Washington Mapes died in 1923. And the Mapes Hotel was, Charlie Mapes was involved. He was the president of the Reno Rodeo Association for a year in the late 60s. And his hotel was the headquarters for the roundup. He told me a story once about Casey Tibbs, the saddle bronc riding champion, was staying at the hotel, and he won $3,000 in the Reno Rodeo. And Charlie had to lend him money for gas to get out of town because he gambled it all away there. And these signs, my son collects neon signs, and the Mapes Cowboys and Wolf had the genius to see that these iconic neon signs would make a nice exhibit for the museum, and there was a spectacular show in 2013. It was wonderful with the neon light reflecting off the polished concrete floors. This one, I don't know. I have no idea. This is a mystery. It was in a collection of drawings, an exhibit for the University of Arizona in 1985. It's Maynard Dixon's Southwest drawings, and they're mainly from Arizona, Native Americans, from portraits from Arizona and New Mexico. This one is labeled Flathead Indian Collecting Feathers, Flathead Indian Reservation. Well, the Flathead Indian Reservation's in Montana, and this clearly says that it's Oregon, July '01. So it is undoubtedly one that was taken in Warner Valley or on their trip from Warner Valley to the Blitzen River area to the P Ranch. This is the P Ranch, founded by Peter French in 1872. And you notice that it says that this was taken before 1898. And the ranch house is here, and you can see it's a single story with roof lines going in opposite directions, fairly small in this grove of poplars. This is what the ranch house looked like afterwards. And this one, there's an interesting story. This gentleman is holding a bridle, obviously, and this one's holding something else. And I think that's for them to show that they were buckaroos. Anyway, I called a friend of mine, Bob Boyd, who was a curator at the High Desert Museum in Bend, and an avid Oregon, and especially Oregon ranching historian, told me his story. He called me to ask about a saddle that he had bought, and I happened to mention, well, that I was doing this talk. And he went on for 45 minutes with this story about, he had occasion to visit an old elderly woman in Laguna Beach, California, and her apartment was almost entirely decorated with Asian furniture, antiques, and artwork, except over the fireplace was a painting of a ranch house, and there was a framed print of horses being worked in a corral. And he asked her how she happened to have these, since they didn't really fit with the rest of the decor. And she told him, I was raised on the largest cattle ranch in Oregon. She went on to say that her father, John South, who was perhaps one of the 6 buckaroos that helped Peter French drive cattle from the Sacramento Valley to the Blitzen River in 1872. He was a foreman and good friend of French's. And when French was murdered in 1897, the French Glen Company asked him to move back and take over the ranch. He had been living in San Francisco and in the livery business, selling horses. And he said, well, you know, in the interim, he had 3 kids, a wife and 3 children, and he said that the little house, this was obviously inadequate. So they promised him that they would expand it so that there would be room for his family. So they built these two-story. You can see the difference in the siding. They're obviously additions. They would add these two-story additions. And so they did, and he moved there with his family, including his daughter, Edith. And she described sitting on the front porch with her father one evening as two horsemen rode up. And the father said, well, they're looking for work or a meal. It turns out they were Maynard Dixon and Ed Borein. And she described the visit, and especially that she sat on the corral next to Dixon when he did the preliminary sketches for some of the works that were later, some of the works that were published in the Harper's Weekly. And and after the drawing that we'll see in a bit, that was on the interior of the Harper's Weekly in May of 1902, he sent a copy of that signed to them. This gives you an idea of what the area looks like. French not only raised cattle, but he raised horses, and he had from 3,000 head on up, which is more than enough to raise stock for your work horses, for the haying crews, and to mount your cowboys. He obviously, it was a secondary product of the ranch. And he built 3 of these barns that were used in the winter during the slack time for buckaroos to break horses. They're pretty amazing buildings. The way they're 100 feet in diameter, and there's a 15-foot track around the outside where horses could be exercised, buggy horses could be run. Then this 2-foot thick sandstone wall, 10 feet high, and the interior is making a circle of about 64 feet. Most people say that was the corral, it was 64 feet, but there were actually stalls. There were these windows around the periphery, and there were individual stalls, probably a dozen of them, and then an interior round pen where they worked horses. I don't have them here, but there were newspaper articles documenting that he marketed horses. One from Winnemucca saying that he'd sent three carloads of horses to San Francisco, and another saying that he'd shipped 5 carloads of horses to Texas. Whoops. This is the drawing that was on the interior of the Harper's Weekly magazine, and this is a preliminary sketch, obviously, that he produced while 8-year-old Edith was sitting next to him. I think this is my favorite. I think it's actually the best of his drawings. You can see, this guy's fishing to make certain that there's nobody over his rope before he pulls it tight and dallies. And this guy has a fairly big loop. And big loops are kind of a symbol of buckaroo methodology. Actually, one of the premier events in buckaroo life now occurs next weekend at Jordan Valley, and they have the Big Loop Rodeo. These are scenes, a roping scene where a guy's jerking his rope back and the bucking horses, breaking a horse, and quirting them. This is a scene taken later on the P Ranch, but this gives you an example of the finery, the silver headstall, and this one's in the exhibit upstairs. I'm not certain that it was done at the P Ranch. It's Oregon buckaroo. It's not dated, but there's this matching one, and I don't know. I suspect it's the same guy, but the saddle is different. And in this one, he's riding a bridle horse. He's straight up in the bridle with reins and romal. And in this one, he's riding, he's breaking a horse with a snaffle bit. More roping scenes, and you can see that buckaroos don't tie their ropes to the horn. They dally, they wrap the horn, and you can see here he's obviously caught something and has wrapped the horn and is holding his slack. He's also leaning into the stirrup on the other side as a counterbalance to the tug, as is this rider. Another roping scene and from the P Ranch. This one is kind of, I put this in as an example of what they would, their equipment. You can see he's wearing chinks, actually armitas. He's riding a single center fire saddle with a tassel or a shoe fly, and the horse's tail is tied up in a war knot. It's interesting. I went to a big loop roping in Winnemucca in November, and a number of the guys had their horses' tails tied up. This is also something that's typical of Great Basin buckaroos. And this is these are armitas. They're listed, and this is the illustration from the catalog that we saw with the Dixon cover from 1904. This is Dixon, or Borein did these drawings on a trip in Mexico, and what we're looking at here, they hung heavy pieces of leather from the saddle horn to protect the rider's legs. These are were especially used in Baja California, where there's a lot of chaparral, a lot of brush country. And these were known as armas. And armitas, it's a diminutive of armas. In other words, once they took the heavy leather off the saddle horn and the rider wore them around his waist. And this one here, you can see that this was the first, this appears in an 1898 Visalia catalog, and they were referred to as cowboy aprons. And these are known as, or they became known as chinks. I kind of distinguish between armitas and chinks because armitas have the tie covered here, and chinks have like a shap belt that I'm not certain that's a useful difference. But this is from a 1940 to 47 Visalia catalog. Still at this time, these were popular only in California and California extended. In other words, Great Basin buckaroo country. And it was sort of a backwater in terms of the cowboy gear that was used here until the late 70s, when the Smithsonian Institution did a study in Paradise Valley of the 96 ranch, and they produced an exhibit, Buckaroos in Paradise, sort of focusing on buckaroo life and gear. And also at this time, Kurt Marcus, the photographer, was assistant editor of Western Horseman magazine, and he came out with a dozen, maybe 20 articles focusing on Great Basin culture and gear. And all of a sudden, interest in buckaroo gear blossomed. So you find chinks everywhere in Texas and Tennessee and Italy, and other chinks especially, but saddle types and lace-up boots as opposed to pull-on. This is drawing. This is a crude Alomar knot where buckaroos would tie up their hair ropes when they weren't using them and pack them on their horse. This is Henry Harris, who was brought to Elko County by John Sparks as a houseboy. He was born of former slaves, and he became a buckaroo boss. and ran wagons and on roundups with mixed crews, which was highly unusual. But he was such a respected, accomplished cowman that it was allowed to happen. He was nominated to the Buckaroo Hall of Fame, which is an interesting institution in Winnemucca, which you have to have been a rancher, a cowboy, gear maker that operated within 200 miles of Winnemucca to be inducted, and you had to be a buckaroo. And when he was nominated, there was some question about whether or not he qualified, since he worked for the Utah Construction Company, which took over the ranch, the Sparks Harrell ranches in eastern Elko County, and they were not a buckaroo outfit. They were known as the double-rigged cowboy outfit. And I let the gentleman that nominated him know that I had records that showed that he'd ordered 2 Visalia saddles in the 1890s while he was employed by John Sparks, and he told me that that was what did the trick. It convinced him that indeed he was eligible. More P Ranch scenes, and you can see you can see how he's handling the slack of his rope here and keeping his dallies tight. Again, this one and here. And they didn't all work. This is recreation. This one was one that Dixon did in 1903 to illustrate some poems that he, Cowhand's Thanksgiving, I believe is the title of the 2 poems. But he did it obviously from memory or sketches done at the P Ranch. And this is a photo. Okay, I'm sorry. This is from that group of photos from 1912 taken on the P Ranch. And then guys at their leisure. These I think are the last ones from the P Ranch, but I really like the banjo. They moved north. This was part of the P Ranch. This was one of their satellite ranches that was closer to Malheur Lake. It was about 20 miles north of the headquarters at French Glen. And this geologic formation is Buena Vista Butte, for which the ranch was named. And this is a sketch of the butte. And this is the Buena Vista Ranch, and you can see, obviously, it's 1912 series of photographs. Again, that's the Blitzen River going through. Buena Vista, typical buckaroo saddle. You can see it's got a loop seat, high cantle, separate stirrup leathers, and narrow fork. And this is one of Visalia from the Visalia catalog that's typical. Then this was an eye-opener to me, because I had always been told and understood that true Californios or descendants or buckaroos never put metal in a horse's mouth until it had been broken using the hackamore, the braided rawhide noseband. And these are from 1901, and they clearly show the snaffle bit in the horse's mouth and hobbles on the front feet. I had heard that the snaffle bit was introduced into California after the Dust Bowl, when the migrants brought them in from Oklahoma and Tennessee. But obviously that wasn't the case. That apparently the horses in the Northwest were pretty rank, pretty tough, and people didn't feel they had the control of the hackamore and had better control with this snaffle bit. Again, these are photos taken in the 1912 trip that sort of mimic what's going on in Dixon's drawings. And notice also that this guy is wearing armitas. This one I put in, the saddles at the time had narrow forks, and they didn't give much security or purchase when riding a bucking horse. So often, to prepare for a bucking horse, they'd tie a blanket or an overcoat or something across the cantle or across the fork of the saddle. Commercial answers to this problem were the bucking rolls, which were added to a narrow fork saddle, or wide forks. And you can see that the patent date is just about the time of their visit. I think it says 1901. This, interestingly enough, is the only image that has a brand on it. And we tried diligently to find out where that belonged, unsuccessfully. And this is Escondido. The way we understand it, it's on the other side of Buena Vista Butte from the Buena Vista Ranch and hidden by the butte. Again, it's a roping scene. The guy's bringing his rayada back. And this one, a bucking horse scene. When they left Buena Vista Ranch, they made stops in Crowley and Harper Ranch. And this is one from Crowley. Crowley is approximately halfway between the P Ranch and Vail, Oregon. I think it's about 60 miles either way. Also, this horse has got a blind on that was used to immobilize the horse while the rider was mounting. This one we also just recently found, this Skull Springs, Oregon, and you see it's already August. So they're on their way from the P Ranch to Vail. And you can see here's Crowley, where we just were, to the Skull Ranch. And then we will go to Harper, where this was one of Miller and Lux's ranches. Miller and Lux gradually bought up ranches and in northern Nevada and Oregon. And at one time they said they could ride from the Mexican border to Canada and stay in one of their ranches, which is a slight exaggeration since they only ran from Bakersfield to Vail, Oregon. And then they made it to Boise, limped into Boise. Supposedly they rode across the Snake River arid plains, subsisting on cornmeal biscuits and jackrabbits. Anyway, they arrived in Boise, and the horses were sick, and they were probably out of money and maybe tired of each other, and so they determined, they sold their outfits and while in Boise, I think these drawings were done and sent to Harper's Weekly. They went from Boise on the Oregon Short Line does it show? Yeah. From Boise to Pocatello, where they stayed for a short time, and they ran into some Bannock Indians who they did drawings of, and some Chippewas from Wisconsin, strangely enough, that taught Dixon some sign language. This is the drawing of a Bannock Indian woman on the way out. And this is the other Borein that they say was he used drawings that he did on the trip to do this cover painting for Sunset in 1908. It's of a mounted Bannock woman. This is the other one. This was the only one until the one with the corpses, the skulls, and, that Borein did, and obviously done on the trip, Oregon 1901. So this is their trip back from Pocatello to Ogden and the train back. Sort of a letdown after an adventure. A train. Anyway, here are the covers, and it shows, and this is a sketch. So everybody says that they were done, that all of them are renditions of the P Ranch, but this is obviously, this one was done in Warner Valley, so the sketches on which this is based are not P Ranch, although it does look like the P Ranch corral. This is the other cover. At first I didn't believe this was Dixon's because it looked wooden to me compared to the others, but then when I saw this rendition of the original, you can see he signed his works L.M. Dixon. And so the signature is there verifying that it is indeed his. And there's a lot of saying that his drawings were important to him and that they influenced his subsequent work. This is a picture that's cartooning of himself that he did. You can see he's escaping his burning studio at the San Francisco fire, and this is what he salvaged. In a 1902 trip to Arizona, he became friends with Lorenzo Hubble, who had the trading post at Ganado, and these are blankets and rugs that he was marketing for Hubble. There's a bison skull, a headdress, I guess some oils, but most importantly, this suitcase that contained his sketches that supposedly were important influences to later work. As far as I can tell, this is an illustration that he did in 1902, and the guy is wearing armitas. This is a sunset cover he did, and again, it's silver-mounted headstall, spade bit, rein chains, reins and romal, and center fire saddle. So he is influenced. But this is a drawing, this painting he did in 1908, and it's pure Texas, cowboy. It's a grazer bit, split reins. He's wearing batwing chaps. It's a double-rigged saddle. Anyway. And that's the end. Could you hear me? I was drifting. Are there questions?
We are over time, so if you need to leave, please feel free. We might just take 2 questions.
Take it up behind you because this is a great crowd. We want to get you in one picture. But Griff, I'm going to have you turn around before everybody takes off. Everybody wait. Thank you.
Questions?
Griff, were you also a Bucker River?
No. No, I'm a saddlemaker groupie. A student and collector, but no. I've owned horses, but I've never considered myself a horseman. So, yeah. Yes?
I remember sitting on a sand dune and you called me about hill camp. I'm glad you figured it out.
Pat's aunt worked on the MC and was
Did he make sketches for his landscapes?
I'm sorry?
Did he make other sketches just for his landscape paintings?
I assume he did, yeah. Although Dorothea Lange, his second wife, said that he had an amazing facility for a memory. He had a photographic memory, and that he could recreate scenes, you know, that he didn't have sketches of. So I'm pretty sure he must have done sketches for his landscapes. Well, you could see, like the Buena Vista one, that's pure landscape. There are a couple of them in here that were. So obviously he did.
Thank you so much, Griff.